Welcome to today's Southwest Desert episode, where we'll be delving into one of the most enduring mysteries of the American Southwest, the legend of the Lost Dutchman Mine. This tale of gold, greed, and treachery has captured the imagination of treasure hunters for over a century. So sit back and join us as we explore the twisting canyons and sun-baked hills of Arizona's Superstition Mountains in search of a legendary fortune. Our story begins in the rugged Superstition Mountains of Arizona. According to legend, gold was first discovered here by the Peralta brothers from Mexico. These intrepid prospectors had stumbled upon a veritable bonanza, 7 rich ore claims hidden in the unforgiving terrain. But their triumph would be short-lived. Tragedy struck when Pedro Peralta and his miners fell victim to an Apache attack. In the aftermath, the Apache carefully concealed all but one of the 7 claims, determined to keep the location of this vast wealth a secret. The Peralta gold seemed destined to be lost to history. Many years passed before 2 men would arrive on the scene, armed with dreams of untold riches. Their names were Jacob Waltz and Jacob Weiser. But Waltz and Weiser weren't the only ones drawn by the siren song of gold. When they reached the mountains, they discovered 2 other prospectors had beaten them to the punch. What happened next would set the tone for the dark history of what would come to be known as the Lost Dutchman Mine. In a shocking turn of events, Waltz and Weiser killed the 2 prospectors, gaining possession of the mine through violence. But the bloodshed didn't end there. In a betrayal that would echo through the years, Jacob Waltz then turned on his partner, shooting Jacob Weiser and claiming sole ownership of the mine. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Lost Gold tale. Please leave a like or comment. For further adventures, hit the subscribe button. And so, Jacob Waltz, the Dutchman of our tale, though he was actually German, found himself the sole keeper of a deadly secret, the location of an incredibly rich gold mine hidden in the forbidding Superstition Mountains. With the mine's riches at his fingertips, Jacob Waltz wasted no time in enjoying his newfound wealth. He gathered his first sack of ore and made his way to Florence, Arizona. There, he proceeded to spend his gold in spectacular fashion, regaling anyone who would listen with tales of his incredible find. Waltz claimed it was an old Spanish working, but the exact location? Well, that was a secret he guarded more closely than the gold itself. The people of Florence were captivated by the Dutchman's stories and his free-flowing wealth. But beneath the excitement, dark rumors began to swirl. People started asking questions about Jacob Weiser. Hadn't he gone into the superstitions with Waltz? And according to the unwritten code of prospectors, wasn't he entitled to half of this golden bounty? The whispers grew, hinting at treachery and worse. Waltz, in a moment of drunken bravado or perhaps guilt, responded to these rumors with a chilling tale. He claimed that Weiser had been killed in a Native American attack, but his story only fanned the flames of suspicion, and Waltz soon found Florence too hot for comfort. Fleeing the rumors in Florence, Waltz next surfaced in Phoenix. Here, where no one knew of Weiser, he once again indulged in wild spending sprees fueled by his seemingly endless supply of rich ore. His drunken boasts about his bonanza whipped the small village into a frenzy of excitement. But Jacob Waltz, for all his faults, was no fool. He knew the dangers of loose lips and greedy neighbors, so he would vanish as suddenly as he appeared, leaving a trail of frustrated would-be followers in his wake. Time and again, Waltz would return to Phoenix with his burros laden with hand-picked ore. On one memorable occasion, he sold a load to Goldman and Company's store that was calculated to be worth more than $10,000 a ton, an astronomical sum for the time. As word of the Dutchman's wealth spread, more and more people began to take an interest in his comings and goings. Crowds would gather, hoping to follow him back to his secret mine. But Waltz was cunning. He constantly changed his route, usually approaching the Superstitions from the northwest so he could watch his back trail for miles into the desert. When particularly determined followers got too close, Waltz would lead them on wild goose chases through the roughest terrain around Weaver's Needle. He'd vanish without a trace, only to reappear days or weeks later at places like Tortilla Flat or Roosevelt, leaving his pursuers baffled and empty-handed. Despite Waltz's precautions, there were those who came tantalizingly close to discovering his secret. One such incident involved a man named Blevins, who lived near Roosevelt. Waltz had stopped at Blevins' cabin for the night while Blevins was away. When Blevins returned and learned he'd just missed the Dutchman, he grabbed his rifle and set off in hot pursuit. After a grueling day of tracking, Blevins followed Waltz's trail to a small flat just south of where Revis and Pine Creeks meet. But there, as if by magic, the tracks simply vanished. Waltz, realizing he was being followed, had started covering his tracks, leaving Blevins with nothing but frustration and unanswered questions. Another close call came when Waltz appeared in Tucson with 2 burro loads of ore, which he sold to Charlie Myers for the princely sum of $1,600. George McClarty, Chuck Brown, and one of the Poston brothers witnessed this sale, and realizing from Waltz's conversation that he had never legally recorded his claim, decided to follow him back to the source of his wealth. They managed to track Waltz as far as Whitlow's ranch on Queen Creek. But once the Dutchman plunged into the maze of twisting canyons beyond, they lost him completely. Adding insult to injury, Waltz soon reappeared in Tucson with even more spectacularly rich ore samples which he had cleaned by A.L. Pellegrin, an assayer. As the years passed, Jacob Waltz's reputation grew. Everyone in Arizona Territory became convinced that the Dutchman was secretly working a hidden bonanza. His continuous production over more than 6 years, coupled with his significant ore sales, left little room for doubt. Yet, strangely, Waltz seemed content to bring out only enough gold at a time to fund his infamous sprees. This led to speculation that he might have a secret cache somewhere in the Superstitions, where he was accumulating a fantastic fortune against a time of need. Waltz himself occasionally hinted at such a possibility, adding fuel to the fire of speculation and greed that surrounded him. For years, this high-stakes game of hide-and-seek continued, with Waltz always proving to be the wilier player. But time, as it always does, began to take its toll. In 1877, at the age of 69, Waltz made a decision that would perplex treasure hunters for generations to come. Citing his advancing age and the increasing difficulty of eluding his many followers, he chose to abandon his bonanza and retire. Waltz rented a plot of ground and an adobe hut near the intersection of Henshaw Road and 16th Street in Phoenix from a Mrs. Henshaw. There, he settled into a life of relative quiet, raising chickens and wine grapes. But even in retirement, Waltz couldn't resist teasing those around him with hints of his secret, guarding it with all the perversity of a child who knows something and won't quite tell. It was during this period that 2 key figures entered Waltz's life, Julia Thomas and Reinhard Petrasch. Julia Thomas owned an ice cream parlor across from the old City Hall in Phoenix. She spoke German, having learned it from her mother who had been a servant in a German family. Julia's way with words and certain physical charms soon had Waltz visiting her regularly, bringing gifts of eggs and his potent homemade wine. Reinhard Petrasch was the son of Old Man Petrasch, a recent arrival from Montana who was establishing a bakery business in Phoenix. Young Reinhard, who delivered bread in Waltz's neighborhood, became quite attached to the old Dutchman. He would often forget his deliveries, sitting for hours listening to Waltz's fabulous tales. Both Julia and Reinhard would become beneficiaries of Waltz's mysterious wealth. When Julia needed money to keep a wandering husband from returning, Waltz told her to dig in his yard, where she unearthed a tin can containing $1,500 in gold dust and nuggets. Similarly, when Reinhardt confided that his family's bakery was on the verge of failure, Waltz gave the boy $500 in gold to buy new equipment and a delivery wagon. As the years rolled on, Waltz grew increasingly feeble. In 1887, 10 years after he had last seen his mine, a significant earthquake shook central Arizona. The tremors were particularly strong along the fault line underlying the Superstitions near Phoenix. This event likely changed many of the landmarks Waltz had used to locate his mine, though in his weakened state, he may not have realized the significance of this. It wasn't until the winter of 1891 that the subject of the mine came up again in earnest. Julia Thomas, who had been nursing ideas of her own, confronted the now 83-year-old Waltz. She pointed out his failing health and dwindling gold supply, convincing him to agree to show her the mine's location with the coming of spring. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. On February 19, 1891, a devastating flood swept through Phoenix, putting most of the town underwater. Waltz's little hut was inundated, forcing him to spend a night exposed to the elements in a cottonwood tree. This ordeal led to a bout of pneumonia, and Reinhardt found him the next morning carrying the ailing Dutchman to Julia's house. Realizing that death was near, Waltz finally shared the secret of his mine with Julia and Reinhardt. He described an 18-inch vein of rose quartz studded with pinhead nuggets of gold, alongside a 3-inch hanging wall of hematite that was about a third gold. He gave them clues to the mine's location: a roofless, 2-room house made of heaped-up stones in the mouth of a north-facing cave near the bottom of a high bluff. From this cave, they were to go about a mile further up a north-south trending canyon until they found a ridge with a natural stone face looking upward to the east. Across from this face, high up in a narrow ravine, they would find the inclined entrance to the mine. Waltz also mentioned the tumbled ruins of an old, Spanish-built stone house near the head of the canyon as a further identifying feature. He then made a rough map, sealed it in an envelope for Julia, and on February 22, 1891, Jacob Waltz, the infamous Dutchman of the Superstition Mountains, breathed his last. With Waltz's death, the hunt for the Lost Dutchman Mine entered a new phase. That summer, Julia Thomas, along with Old Man Petrash and his son Herman, formed a partnership to search for the mine. They spent several months combing the Superstitions, managing to locate Waltz's placer workings near Goldfield, but the main shaft eluded them. Waltz's crude map proved entirely undecipherable. In later years, after Julia and the elder Petrash had passed away, Reinhardt and Herman continued the search, both together and separately. But despite Reinhardt's close association with Waltz, he found that he had paid little attention to the old man's repeated instructions over the years. When he tried to recall them, he found his memories jumbled and unreliable. Over time, more clues emerged as people shared chance remarks Waltz had made during his years in Phoenix. He once said, "You'll never find it, but if you pass 3 red hills, you have gone too far." This likely referred to the Red Hills about half a mile north of the junction of Bluff Springs and Needle Canyon. Another time, Waltz mentioned that he couldn't be seen from the military trail in the canyon below, but that he could watch the trail from his mine. He also spoke of having to climb up a short way from a steep ravine to see Weaver's Needle to the south from above his mine. One of Waltz's favorite stories was about how the setting sun, coming through a break in the mountains between Weaver's Needle and another peak, would shine into his inclined shaft and make the ore glitter. This suggests the shaft faced west. As we conclude our journey through the legend of the Lost Dutchman Mine, we're left with more questions than answers. But isn't that the nature of a truly great mystery? It leaves us wondering, imagining, and dreaming of what might be hidden just around the next bend in the canyon. This has been the tale of the Lost Dutchman Mine. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep exploring, keep wondering, and always be ready for adventure. Please leave a like or comment. For further desert romps, hit the subscribe button. Happy trails!